Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Truths, a place where we'll explore hidden scenarios, histories, and truths hidden from the public view. If you haven't seen the last episode, I highly encourage you to view it before this one, as it is very important to understand the upcoming part. Last episode, we identified Gog and Magog as the Red Jews. We established a link between the Levant, Europe, and England, and milk. Revealed the desire for their destruction by the Reds. And forewarning, these first few minutes are about adult content with a heavy focus on biology. We will now return to the subject of milk and blood. Reminder: the people identified by Jews as Amalek, from England to the Levant, all drank milk. The Israelites were promised milk and honey, and had laws on milk consumption. Yet, the Red Jews admit that 75% of them are lactose intolerant. They aren't who they claim to be. Despite being important, this deception is fairly shallow. We have to go deeper to get to the truth. In fact, as deep as we can possibly go, the very beginning. The first substance you consumed after being born is your mom's milk. Before that, the first substance was her blood. When your mother was pregnant with you, your two bodies were separated in the womb and connected via an umbilical cord, which flowed in whole blood containing oxygen and nutrients into you, and expelled waste products mediated through your organ your mother had made, a placenta. The placenta acts as a temporary interface to the world for babies, and is two-sided, one with the mother's genes and the other dominated by the father's genes. These are separated by intervillous space made of the mother's blood. It protects the mother from the baby, too. When the baby is born, the placenta is ejected alongside it. The baby can no longer consume its mother's blood, its stomach can't consume foods, and its immune system isn't developed. So, during the pregnancy, prolactin hormones cause the mom to form mammary glands that secrete milk. The mammary glands consist of 20 alveolus. These are little pipets, which are actuated by the nervous system when the babies are suckling is detected. The mother generates milk, initially colostrum, and keeps the pipet full through a complex, externally controlled homeostasis. The milk itself is synthesized inside lactocyte cells, which takes in the building materials from the mother's blood supply and synthesizes as beta/casein, casein, milk fat globules. As a reaction to ever-present bacteria, white blood cells traverse the cell walls and enter the milk. The mother cells also synthesize minerals, enzymes, secrete water as a filling compound, vital vitamins, and everything else a baby needs to grow all on its own, at least for the first 6 months. At no point was the mother's red blood directly connected to the milk. This is very important. Producing all of this material takes a great deal of plasma resources. Even a healthy, well-fed mother will have to sacrifice something. Thus, the same prolactin hormone that produces the milk/mammary glands will also stop thickening of the womb lining. This stops menstruation. All human beings will notice this pattern. Fertility disappears while breastfeeding. Fertility is indicated by regular menstruation. Once menstruation stops, lactation stops. To make matters more unfortunate, due to the glucose content in blood, it tasted sweet, like milk. Thus, from the ancient times of this cycle up until the 19th century, milk was thought of as a white blood, and blood was thought of as red milk. Earlier, we showed why this is false. The milk is synthesized without connection to the blood. Alas, this was only a recent discovery. This false notion, conceived independently across the world, has had dire consequences for our species throughout history. As food was used as a sacrifice/religious offering, often for atonement. And milk was a food. Blood was seen as the food of the gods. And it gets worse. It was often the case that the priests and the public would share food with the gods. You can imagine, it's not just an offering of apples and pears, or even goats and bulls, but human beings, often prisoners, virgin maidens, sometimes children, human sacrifice, and cannibalism. In many of these rituals, some kind of altar was involved, and blood contacting said altar was equivalent to the gods consuming the sacrifice. This kind of savaging may seem irrational on the surface, but it had multiple purposes, some sociopolitical, others for darker reasons. Focusing on the sociopolitical, a settlement grew to its carrying capacity, even if the inhabitants were responsible in giving birth to people. Outside pressures, such as war or climate upheaval, created famines. Then, there is a loss of order and the worst consequences. When there is plenty to go around, creatures will suppress their dark nature. It is only an adversary that the meddling of a being is being tested. Most will fail. When pitted against the prospect of starving, or seeing their loved ones starve, most people will steal each other's share. In the most horrific cases, people will eat each other. See many cases in Egypt and China. Religions around the world blamed cataclysms which would affect food production or stability on sins of the people, causing gods to get angry. To atone, human and other sacrifices were needed. Conducting genocidal wars and usurping other nations' lands were also options, and these could be thought of as sacrifices at a national level. As a mother gave birth to a child with her blood, then milk, and a moral society is set in motion to spill blood and still milk and land. One particularly genocidal religion, Old Covenant Judaism, did away with internal human sacrifices. Instead, the premise was other people would be sacrificed as whole, not just via blood rituals. This was done for a promised land of milk and honey. Moses and subsequent armies were particularly strict, especially when they had set up a temple. Blood was never to be consumed. Furthermore, milk and flesh could never be consumed together, perfectly disassociating the two. However, animal blood sacrifices were still required. Earlier in the chronology, Abraham's substitution of a sheep in place of Isaac, his son, set this in motion. A grand temple would be built, and animals sacrificed with their blood splashing against an altar. The Jews would later break their Mosaic covenant and be damned by God. They would rebuild the temple and return to the Levant after being thoroughly corrupted by Babylon. It is then that God placed His Spirit in Jesus Christ, performed miracles only God could, and spoke of the Word, allowing Jesus to be sacrificed for all of humanity on April 3rd, 33 AD. Jesus had fulfilled all the signs and rites of the Messiah, also ended their temple, whose veil was torn on its own from top to bottom. They would answer back with a revolt, in which they murdered almost every single follower of Christ. The Romans responded by destroying the Jews. With their revolt answered and their people scattered into captivity and exile for good, the Jews as a unified people were over, and would genetically drift over time into separate groups of people. They were no longer Israelites, but their hatred for what happened never died. They retained their animal sacrifice rituals and scripts, and added much content to their Talmud over the next 400 years. Unbeknownst to them, they had set themselves up to be exploited by a far more vengeful creatures that hate all of humanity. More on that in the far future. As we turn our focus back to the Middle East, rather than focusing on blood and milk, this time will be copper and tin, the Bronze Age collapse, the greatest blood ritual of all, our origin and the end of the entire ancient white world. Canonically, 33,000 to 3,200 years ago, in an event that had changed the entire world, the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse was less of a collapse and more of a world war. Despite the importance of this event, it's rarely taught in schools and was usually blamed on climate change. This finally changed thanks to the works of archaeologists who found an unfired clay tablet in the ancient Syrian city of Ugarit near Idlib. In this tablet, it was made clear sea attacks were happening, and a great deal of evil was exalted on these niches. Everyone was destroyed. All the ancient civilizations, most importantly the Phoenicians, called Canaanites for Judeo-Satanic reasons they did not identify as such, were destroyed. All but the Egyptians. The Egyptians survived, but only barely. They gave the attackers a name, the Sea Peoples. There is a great emphasis on the plurality of the word, peoples, as they consisted of 9 different nations. Luca, Shurden, Shekelish, Peleset, Denyen, Teresh, Dejeker, Weshesh, and Ekwesh. It's unknown who any of these groups were, but we now know of Ramses III's opinion. Ramses III described the Sea Peoples as bloodthirsty, anarchical, and evil. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their lands. All at once, the lands were removed and scattered into the fray. No land could stand before their arms, yet the mechanics were far more complex. To dig into this subject, it is first important to set aside our modern history of this supposed era, which consists only of the following primary sources: Josephus, the inventor of Jewish history, the Old Testament, Herodotus, the father of lies, and Homer's Iliad. That is it. You might be wondering, what about the rest? Since Egypt survived, surely there would be some good material there. There you would be wrong. We know for a fact that such material existed, but was destroyed. Manetho wrote a highly cited work called Egyptica, of which no copy survived. Josephus, the inventor of Jewish history, studied Manetho in order to defend Jewish people. Manetho had attacked Moses as a misanthropic shepherd of lepers, and linked the Jews to Hyksos, who occupied a part of Egypt for 500 years before being expelled into Palestine. We only have Josephus' retelling of Manetho's telling of history. Manethos described that the Asiatics, cruel people who were misanthropes, impure, and corrupted the land. It's quite interesting how the blood ritual animal sacrifices were described as humiliation rituals. The Hyksos do sound similar to the Sea Peoples, but we cannot be so certain. The timelines do not quite align, but only if we buy the supposed carbon dating methodology used to time the Sea Peoples' attacks, supposedly 3,300 years ago. The Hyksos attacked Egypt 400 years earlier. The time between the Hyksos expulsion from Egypt, which would be the Exodus in the Old Testament, and the Sea Peoples is within 1 or 2 centuries, however. This would have created a great deal of refugees. One other event is said to have happened around this time: the Trojan War. The Trojan Wars, as told in Homer's epic poems, Iliad and Odyssey, were seen as mythology by most historians throughout the modern period until a German, Heinrich Schliemann, discovered the site in modern Turkey back in 1870. It was a real war with massive repercussions. As an important aside, the Trojan Wars were said by Homer to be a consequence of Zeus's overthrowing of Kronos, Saturn, and all of the Titans with them, in order to appease the Olympians, who replaced the Titans. Keep this in mind and recall the painting of Kronos eating his child. Due to the Trojan Wars, a massive number of people were made refugees and scattered across the world. This war also broke what was a relatively peaceful period of time, where nations, such as Phoenicia, focused primarily on trade. Nations presumably went about their business as usual. This created an opportunity for misanthropes to take over the entire world through a relatively simple strategy. 1. Recruit a portion of the displaced into the mercenary armies using their own wealth. 2. Attack unprepared nations using these people. 3. Create more displaced people. 4. Repeat. The cities would be destroyed entirely, so there is no return for these people. The nation's wealth must be looted and used to fund more expeditions. It would be like a fire burning across humanity, with the refugees to become sea peoples. This is why there were 9 nations. The party needs only to wait either natural disasters or wars to exploit, and other factors, pre-existing wealth to seed the operation, and no homeland that could face this kind of attack. They must also hold extreme hatred for humanity, misanthropy, and have an intended target. In all of the ancient past, only one group of people fit this description: The Hyksos, who were expelled from Egypt, these people created a capital called Avaris, which blocked and taxed much trade into Egypt by land or sea. You can think of it as the ancient Suez Canal. With this kind of rent-seeking area gone, the Hyksos would have had to find a new homeland where they could toil the soil. They would have fled with their wealth, perhaps enough gold to forge an entire golden calf? Who can tell in this age? Returning to the Bronze Age collapse and sea peoples, while Egypt was largely damaged but withstood the attack, all other nations were destroyed, their histories pillaged and made another's. This created a power vacuum. One nation rose from it, Israel, led by the Hebrews, at the same time as the sea peoples were resettled into the area. The most significant thing is the disruption of sea trade and the destruction of Phoenicia. And it's with this that we tie it back to the first part, where we made the connection between Britannia and Phoenicia. As a reminder, Britain was the land of tin, by name even. There was one counterpart to this tin, copper. You see, bronze is made up of tin and copper. This formed the main metal used for weaponry in that age. And the main source of copper was the land of copper, Cyprus, or Copperus in Phoenician and Amharic. In order to bring about the Bronze Age, you need to be able to reliably produce bronze. That means control of both Cyprus and Britain. In today's maps, it's difficult to imagine this despite knowing Phoenicia's seafaring prowess, but fear not, we can objectively demonstrate it. To do so, we're going to give you a crash course on genetics. You'll all have 46 chromosomes in the form of helical DNA. 23 from your mother, 23 from your father, but you also have a special kind of DNA in each of your mitochondria. A circular one, called mitochondrial DNA, from your mother. And there are two special chromosomes, the sex ones. The others are the autosomal chromosomes. The X chromosome you get either from your dad or your mother, so it can't delineate paternal heritage. The Y chromosome you have is the same as your father's, his grandfather's, and so on. Scientists use the Y chromosome to determine origin, as they can all be grouped within small variation into what can be called Y chromosomal haplogroups. From these, scientists use their imagination to draw migration routes. This completely ignores wars and catastrophes. Men will not merely migrate, but unfortunately, rape and pillage lands during their wars. The Bronze Age collapse was described as a melting pot. The original character of the land disappeared. Many further wars occurred in West Asia, as it is a strategic trading route for all empires. We can get past this easily if we use our heads. The women who are unfortunately raped or taken as war trophies by settling victorious armies will be cared for if they give birth to their children. Those children will retain the mitochondrial DNA of their mother, so prepare for a surprise! In this map, we observe mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X. This haplogroup existed in all Phoenician lands, Britain, and one other shocking place, North America. This data was filtered to be within the natives that remained, not the people who migrated in. This completely destroys anthropology. It is notable that haplogroup X exists most strongly in Gaelic areas in Britain and Iceland. Now, could this be Atlantis? How deep are these historical inconsistencies? What happened to these people? These questions unfortunately must wait. For while I hope you enjoyed part 2 of Milk vs. Blood. Once again, I thank Cirnosad for compiling such a vast array of knowledge into something coherent. Next time, we will discuss the origin of the Reds. Until next time, bye-bye!